First and foremost, I want to say thank you to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. If it wasn't for him, this wouldn't be possible. So hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, share this video, and let's get my subscribers up, man. So tonight we're going to cook. Saul Canelo Alvarez recently had a victory last Saturday in Mexico over John Ryder. Big shout out to Canelo Alvarez, a walking Hall of Famer, a living legend, a great fighter nevertheless. There's a lot of debate among boxing fans and historians, and the debate is about Canelo Alvarez and his place in greatness. Is Canelo Alvarez the greatest Mexican fighter of all time? And my answer is absolutely. To me, Canelo Alvarez has already surpassed the legendary Julio Cesar Chavez. He surpassed Chavez in accomplishments and accolades. Canelo Alvarez won titles in multiple weight classes. Canelo Alvarez is the first Mexican fighter to win championships at 154, which is junior middleweight, 160, which is middleweight, 168, super middleweight, undisputed, and 175, which is light heavyweight. Usually the great Mexican fighters win titles in all of the lower weight classes, all the way up to welterweight. It's very rare that you see a Mexican fighter become a world champion in weight classes above 147 and become legends. Canelo Alvarez, mind you, in stature and height, is not that much taller than Julio Cesar Chavez. Canelo Alvarez also has a deeper resume than Julio Cesar Chavez. No disrespect, Julio Cesar Chavez is a legend. But to me, Canelo Alvarez has already surpassed Julio Cesar Chavez. So yes, for me, Saul Canelo Alvarez is the greatest Mexican fighter of all time. Now my next question that everyone talks about is this: is Canelo Alvarez the greatest Latino fighter of all time? That's a good debate, because Julio Cesar Chavez is definitely among that conversation. But my answer, in my personal professional opinion, if Canelo Alvarez is the greatest Latino fighter of all time, is absolutely not. Absolutely not. For me, the greatest Latino fighter of all time is Roberto Manos de Piedra Duran. Now you already know my gimmick, right? The title is about Canelo Alvarez. My gimmick is to talk about modern boxing, not common. And I'm not gonna edit it neither. This is me shooting off the hip, speaking nothing but facts. But my gimmick is I talk about modern boxing, whether it's modern boxing events or modern fighters. But I use that opportunity to bring in the past, so I can give you guys an education on the history of boxing, the past, the present, the future, and that's the gimmick. So with that being said, there's many reasons why I rank Roberto Duran ahead of Julio Cesar Chavez and Saul Canelo Alvarez and every other legendary Latino fighter in boxing. Not because Roger Mayweather said it, and rest in peace Roger Mayweather. Roger Mayweather obviously knows his boxing. Roger Mayweather is the OG that came up with that phrase, "Y'all don't know ish about boxing." Salute to Roger Mayweather. Rest in peace, brother. Let me take a sip of this wine for you. And I don't drink like that, by the way. Anyway, so when you compare the careers of Saul Canelo Alvarez and Roberto Duran, it's comparable two fighters, two Latino fighters, highly decorated, won championships in multiple weight classes, defeated a plethora of extraordinary fighters. But Saul Canelo Alvarez is not better than Roberto Duran. He's not better than Roberto Duran on a skill set level, and he's not better than Roberto Duran as far as legacy fights, big wins. Roberto Duran came from an era where you had the most skilled fighters probably ever in boxing. You had guys like Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, Wilfredo Benitez, Larry Holmes, Alexis Arguello, Aaron Pryor, the list goes on and on. Roberto Duran was also #1 pound for pound in the world. Now, when you compare the careers of Roberto Duran and Saul Canelo Alvarez, you have to look at this fact. Roberto Duran is considered by many as the greatest lightweight of all time, right? Now, you look at the weight classes that he competed at. He turned pro at 126 pounds. He became a world champion at 135, which is a lightweight, 147, which is welterweight, 154, which is junior middleweight, and 160, which is middleweight. Canelo Alvarez won titles in the weight classes that I mentioned earlier, right? However, Canelo Alvarez on none of those weight classes is considered by anyone as the greatest. No one considers Canelo Alvarez as the greatest junior middleweight of all time. Nobody considers Canelo Alvarez as the greatest middleweight of all time, or the greatest super middleweight of all time, or light heavyweight of all time. Now, don't get me wrong. Canelo Alvarez, to my knowledge, because I did not look up the facts on what I'm about to say. I'm shooting off the hip right now. But Canelo Alvarez, to my knowledge, is the first undisputed super middleweight champion of all time. However, just because he's the first undisputed super middleweight champion of all time, to me, he's not the greatest super middleweight of all time, due to the fact that his era wasn't the greatest of super middleweights. You had guys like James Toney, who was doing what he was doing at super middleweight. You had guys like Roy Jones Jr. that was doing what he was doing at super middleweight. Those guys, to me, are ranked higher than Canelo Alvarez at super middleweight. Because at that time, James Toney and Roy Jones, they weren't just fighting a particular race of fighters. They weren't just feasting on Europeans. They weren't just fighting Mexicans. They were fighting slick black fighters. Slick black fighters, at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, are the top elite fighters in boxing, along with Latino fighters as well. But James Toney and Roy Jones came from a whole different era, and they dominated. So for me, Canelo is not the greatest super middleweight of all time. But Roberto Duran is the greatest lightweight of all time. And this is a weight class where you had guys such as Floyd Mayweather, Pretty Boy Floyd Mayweather competed at 135. Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker competed at 135. Julio Cesar Chavez competed at 135. Hector Macho Camacho competed at 135. But none of Shane Mosley, Oscar De La Hoya, I could go on and on. But none of those guys had the run at 135 that Roberto Duran had. Now we're going to talk about resume. Canelo Alvarez and Roberto Duran both have a solid resume. Canelo Alvarez, he beat Austin Trout. I believe Canelo might have been an underdog going into that fight, or at least it was 50-50. He beat Irislandi Lara. He beat Miguel Cotto. He beat Triple G, which is his biggest win, who's also going to be a Hall of Famer one day. He beat Billy Joe Saunders, who was undefeated. He beat Caleb Plant. He moved up to beat Sergey Kovalev. The detractors of Canelo Alvarez will say that Kovalev was washed up. I agree to the fact that Kovalev was past his prime, But for Canelo to move up to 175 and knock Kovalev out, you still have to give Canelo all the credit in the world for that, right? Now, we look at Roberto Duran's resume. He beat Ken Buchanan to become the lightweight champion of the world. Roberto Duran was an underdog. He beat, and I'm talking about his lightweight resume right now. He beat the Japanese boy, former world champion. Please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing his name correctly. Ibeabushi or something like that. But he was a world champion, right? He beat the Verrett brothers, Edwin and Rodolfo Verrett. Those guys were incredible fighters. And I gotta bring this resume up first, because a lot of people that really don't know nothing about boxing will be quick to say, oh, Roberto Duran, all he fought was Sugar Ray and Tommy Hearns and Marvin Hagler. No, Roberto Duran has an incredible resume. I know my boxing. This is why this is low-nose boxing, because I know what I'm talking about. So he beat the Verrett brothers, right? He also beat a Puerto Rican legend in Esteban de Jesus. Those guys fought 3 times at 135 pounds, right? Roberto Duran beat Sugar Ray Leonard. He beat Iran Barkley. He beat Carlos Palomino. He beat Pepino Cuevas. He beat Davey Moore. I mean, Roberto Duran had a crazy resume, but this is what separates Roberto Duran and Canelo Alvarez. The ability to overcome the odds. To win a fight, a big fight is one thing, right? But to win a big fight as an underdog, that's a whole different story. That's a whole different level of greatness right there. You got the haters that are gonna say, oh, Roberto Duran say no mas. He quit against Sugar Ray Leonard. Yeah, he did. He gave up in that second fight. But the way and the fact that he was able to bounce back from that demoralizing loss to go on and accomplish more greatness is a testament of the willpower and the determination and mental fortitude that Roberto Duran has, because he's still doing good for himself in life right now. Shout out to Roberto Duran, right? And here's the biggest difference. Roberto Duran has single-handedly the biggest win that any fighter has ever had, moving up in weight to defeat a bigger champion. Duran moved up from 135 pounds to 147. He had about 2 or 3 fights to acclimate himself to the weight class and defeated Sugar Ray Leonard. What he did in accomplishing that feat is the equivalent of Gervonta Tank Davis becoming undisputed at 135 and then jumping to 147, getting 2 or 3 acclimation fights, and then beating Errol Spence Jr. But guess what? Roberto Duran beat Sugar Ray Leonard. And the reason why I say that's the biggest win any fighter has ever had moving up in weight is this. For the most part in boxing, whenever a smaller fighter jumps up in weight to defeat a naturally bigger fighter, right? Normally, usually, the smaller guy is the faster guy, the slicker guy, the better boxer, the more skilled fighter. And usually the bigger fighter that he beats, the only advantages he has is size, strength, and punching power. Roberto Duran moved up 2 weight classes to defeat a fighter that was not only younger than him, bigger than him, faster than him, slicker than him, more decorated than him, being that he was an Olympic gold medalist. He defeated a guy that eventually became a top 5 all-time great pound for pound. Roberto Duran defeated a slick black fighter in Sugar Ray Leonard, probably one of the greatest slick black fighters in the history of all of boxing. A lot of Canelo detractors have a narrative where they say that Canelo Alvarez avoids slick black fighters. I'm not one of those guys because Canelo Alvarez has defeated some slick black fighters. However, if Canelo Alvarez were to retire today, he's going to go down in the Hall of Fame, right? He's still going to be a legend. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be that question. Why Canelo Alvarez did not fight Charlo or Demetrius Andrade? And of course, David Benavidez. Roberto Duran retired and left no stones unturned. Roberto Duran challenged himself. Now, I'm not saying Canelo Alvarez didn't challenge himself, because he did. He was an underdog going into the Triple G fight. But here's the big difference. Canelo Alvarez, when he fought Floyd Mayweather, right? Canelo Alvarez was the younger fighter. Floyd Mayweather was the smaller guy. Floyd Mayweather was also the older guy at 36 years old. Besides experience, the physical advantages that Floyd Mayweather had going into that fight was his skill set, his speed, his defense, and his reflexes. And Floyd was the smaller guy moving up with those advantages. So Roberto Duran, on the other hand, was the smaller guy moving up to fight the bigger guy that had all of those physical advantages that Floyd Mayweather had. You feel what I'm saying? That's like Canelo being the smaller guy, the older guy, moving up to fight the younger guy with all the intangibles and advantages that Floyd Mayweather had. Those are the same advantages that Sugar Ray Leonard had. But what did Roberto Duran do? He used his experience and his gamesmanship to manipulate Sugar Ray Leonard into fighting the type of style that would give Roberto Duran the advantage. Roberto Duran won that fight. That alone surpasses anything that Canelo Alvarez has ever done, right? And now we already have the detractors that's going to say Duran quit in the rematch. Okay, Duran bounced back and eventually moved to 154 pounds and knocked out Davey Moore. Davey Moore was the favorite. He was a younger guy in his prime, a fighter who was a phenom, who was fast-tracked. Roberto Duran took him apart in probably one of his best performances ever and knocked him out in Madison Square Garden, right? On Duran's birthday. Achieved more greatness. We're going to go further than that right now. Roberto Duran moved up to 160 pounds and took on Iran Barkley. The same Iran Barkley that knocked out Tommy Hearns. Tommy Hearns had knocked out Roberto Duran. Roberto Duran was 37 years old, moving up to 160. Mind you, Duran began his career at 127 pounds, right? So you could imagine what the detractors had to say going into that fight. You could imagine what the odds were going into that fight. He's fighting a guy that knocked out the guy that knocked him out a few years earlier. And Barkley beat Tommy Hearns twice. Mind you, the same Iran Barkley who later on in the 90s got beaten by James Toney. And to this day, that's considered one of James Toney's best wins over Iran Barkley. And mind you, Iran Barkley was past his prime. Still a very good fighter, still a world champion, but he was past his prime. And James Toney was in his prime. But Roberto Duran, past his prime, moving up in weight, defeated a prime Iran Barkley. That is a feat that Canelo Alvarez has not done. Can Canelo Alvarez eventually surpass Roberto Duran? It's possible. His career is not over yet. As far as what he has to do to pass Roberto Duran, that's another story. That's another topic. That's another video. Roberto Duran, hands down, Manos de Piedra, is the greatest Latino fighter of all time. This video is not to degrade Canelo Alvarez in any way. This video is just to bring you up to speed to the history of boxing, because a lot of fans are not aware of that. So it was a pleasure to provide you all with that education and information. So once again, you know what to do. Hit the like button, share this video, subscribe, leave a comment. Low Nose Boxing. I know what I'm talking about. Good night and God bless. I'm out.